I want to say something as you turn to Isaiah chapter 9. Book of Isaiah chapter 9. That song, He Gets Sweeter Each Day, I look around in the world today and so many people's looking for love and acceptance, and they're looking in the wrong places. I'm not trying to coin a phrase of a country song, but they are looking in the wrong places, because in order to be satisfied, you first have to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And once that's complete, once He's your all in all, then you have room to add somebody, a helpmate with you. But there's so many people out there looking for that perfect mate, that perfect one that's going to answer or love them and to make them feel accepted and wanted. When human beings can't do that. We all have our flaws. We do the best we can, but we all fall short from time to time. And I want to encourage us to teach our young children that it's not about who you meet, it's about who you serve, and that's Jesus Christ. And then begin praying early about who God would have you to marry, and if not, He may not even have you marry. He may have you go to the mission field. He may have you do a lot of things, but let God be the decider of your future. And it'll make things so much better. We talked about the Assyrian invasion, the prediction of the Assyrian invasion, which would not happen for many years. The Syrian army had been active in early Isaiah's days, and the northern kingdom had combined to destroy the southern kingdom with the Assyrian army. But there was going to be a new kingdom come on place, the Assyrian army eventually. And Isaiah in chapter 8 begins to prophesy about that, talking about how they would join forces. In chapter 9, as we finished up chapter 8, talks about how that the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom would search for help and would find none. We as today, we look for ways out of our situations. Many times we look the wrong place for the answers, don't we? Same thing they did. We have a tendency to, especially men, we think we can handle it and make our own decisions and fix the problem, fix everything, and we can't always do that. We have to trust God to deliver. Look to God, our Maker. So, before we get into chapter 9, we're going to say a quick prayer. So pray for me as the Lord leads us, guys. Father, open up your word to us tonight, Lord, as we study through Isaiah, Lord, that you would help us to see, Father, what you'd have us to glean from it. Help it to be food for our souls, Lord, that it helps us to grow thereby. Lord, give us the weapons that we stand in need of to fight the fight of faith, Lord. The battles we face every day. Lord, we thank you that you change not, that you're the same yesterday, today, and forever. The same God that Isaiah served is the same God we serve today. Lord, I thank you for that confidence and hope that we have. Now open your word to us, Father, as we study. Make it easy for us to glean from it, Lord, and apply it. And we'll give you all the praise and honor and glory in Jesus' name. And all the church said, amen. Beginning of chapter 9, a divine child is Israel's only hope, is the way mine starts out. And Syria and Samaria, the northern kingdom, had made a confederation with each other. And any time a great force comes against you, your natural inclination is to seek help. Right? And that's where the southern kingdom is. They're looking for somebody to help. So Isaiah says in chapter 9, nevertheless, I like that word nevertheless. You know what nevertheless means? Anybody ever thought about nevertheless? It means, paraphrase, it means after trying everything you can, after doing all the struggles you can do to figure it out yourself, when it's all said and done, this is the answer. Nevertheless. In other words, this is what you should have done in the first place, trusting God. But anyway, it says, nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation. In other words, in her vexation, Israel's outlook didn't look very bright. But God's saying that nevertheless, it's not going to be as dark as it really looks like. And that's something we need to remember in our own walk with the Lord. It's never as dark as it really looks like. The devil likes to paint a bleak picture. Now remember, when the northern kingdom and Syria came against the southern kingdom, it looked bad. It looked like they had no way of getting out of the situation. So when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterwards did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan in Galilee of the nations. In other words, nevertheless the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, and afterwards did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan in Galilee of nations. The people that walked in darkness have seen great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shine. In other words, it might get worse. It looks bad, but it might get worse. And even though sometimes our situation looks bleak, it can get worse. We pray for it to get better, but sometimes it gets worse, doesn't it? But what we want to remember is the people that walked in darkness have seen great light. In other words, through the struggle, through the strife they was going through, the people that trusted in God saw God working. Saw God working in the midst of it. Isaiah is a prime example. We have others, Jeremiah. We have others that saw that God was working in the midst. Even though problems was happening all around them and things was going wrong, the people that walk in darkness have seen a great light. The darker it is, the easier it is for a light to penetrate that darkness. You ever been out on a dark night? Doesn't take a real bright light for you to see some light over there, does it? And so it's saying, even though everything looks dark, and you may think you're walking in darkness, there is a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. In other words, they might not have the answer, but there is hope. There's hope. I want to go back to something I was thinking about earlier today. In Job, the 19th chapter, 25th verse, it says, For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself. And mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. Now, what is he saying here? We know the story of Job. Couldn't look much blacker than what Job had been through. He lost all his children had died, all his wealth had disappeared, all his health had disappeared. But he said, there's a light. I know my Redeemer liveth. And so that's what Isaiah is trying to get across here. No matter how bleak it looks, God's still on the throne. And there's a light that will be shining through that, and that light is Jesus Christ. That dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. Thou hast multiplied the nations, and not increased the joy. They joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, and as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. Thou hast multiplied the nations. They have sent out to try to get help. They sent them to Egypt to try to get help. One place that Isaiah sent to the king of the southern kingdom and said, you can't depend on Egypt to help. And it's saying here, they multiplied the nations. They tried to get people to help. How many people remember in the Desert Storm and when we invaded Iraq, they tried to get a coalition of nations, they called it, to help. That's kind of what it's talking about here. Thou hast multiplied the nations, but it's not increased the joy. It didn't make you feel safe. It didn't make you, the answers you come up with didn't make you feel safe. It didn't make the joy increase that the problems were going to be solved. It's the same thing with us. We try so many ways to get out of problems, don't we? To fix the solution for ourselves. And it doesn't bring joy to us. Sometimes it's to change jobs. Sometimes it's to do something drastic. We think, well, I've got to just change everything about myself. And it doesn't bring the joy. And he says that it not increase the joy, that they joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, and as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. In other words, the help comes saying, we can do it. We can deliver you. But there's no help in them because they can't do it. The only help that they can have is through God and His help. And that's what it's supplying here. There's a lot of times that the world says that they have the answer. they can get you out of a situation. I like these people that talk about, if you're in debt, go refinance. Well, if you can't pay the first one, how are you going to pay the second one? So, and that's a kind of a silly answer, isn't it? So what we have here is, or put it on another credit card, or pay off that card with another credit card, and all these things. It's kind of the same notion here. They joy before thee according to the joy and harvest, and as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. In other words, before the battle is even fought, they're rejoicing like people that had already seen the victory. Egypt's going to come. Egypt is going to deliver us from this mess. But Egypt would be no help for them. For who? Thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, and the staff of his shoulder, and the rod of his power, as in the day of Midian. What's he talking about in the day of Midian? Anybody have any ideas about the day of Midian? Who was Balak and Balaam? Remember Balak and Balaam in Exodus? Balak was the king of the Midianites. And he called Balaam and said, I want you to come curse the nation of Israel so that I can win this battle against them. And Balaam came to curse. Remember the donkey speaking to Balaam? Well, what's it saying here? For thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Midian. In other words, God's going to take care of the situation as he did in the day of Midian. In other words, God went on behalf of the children of Israel, did nothing. When Balaam went to curse them, who stopped Balaam from cursing? God did. The children of Israel didn't even probably realize, I guess they did, and Moses wrote it down, but they might not have at the time even known that this was going on. And God went and fought on behalf of them. But thou hast broken the yoke of his burden. Who? The one that would help you. The one that you put your trust in. If you give in and seek that one to trust in, God's going to break that yoke from you. It'll become a yoke to you. If God delivers you, it won't be a yoke to you. You follow what I'm saying? For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. You're in a battle. Anybody that's been in a battle can tell you there's a lot of noise and a lot of confusion. My Uncle William was in Pearl Harbor on the Oklahoma, I believe it was. And he also was on another ship that got attacked and sunk. And he went through battle. And one night he come in and sat down, and we was watching a war movie on TV. And he said, boys, I'll tell you something. He said, that doesn't begin to show what it's like. He said, because they can never show you the smells. They can never show you the sound and the fears that come from the sound. And he said to clean up afterwards. So they can never do those things. So it's talking about here, for every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood. What's he trying to say? He's saying that Egypt might come fight for you. He's not named Egypt here, but if you want to go back into Kings and find where Isaiah was prophesying to Hezekiah and prophesying to others about not to go to the king of Egypt and all these things, what he's saying here is nobody knows what the outcome of the battle may be. It's confusion, it's noise, it's bloody. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. In other words, the Lord's going to do the work. The Lord's going to do the fight for them with purpose. Well, what's he saying in verse 6? So he prophesies. See, they're looking for help to get them out of danger now. See, God doesn't necessarily work on the now. He does intercede on behalf of us, but God has a plan way out into the future that we don't know sometimes of. We have it here in the Bible to understand, but I don't know what he's got planned for 10 years from now. What I see is what's going on in the church today. What might happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now with this church, we don't have a clue. We have our ideas, so he says this, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." Well, this seems kind of out of place here, doesn't it? He's talking about looking for somebody to bail you out of trouble, and he's saying if you go after the world to do that, you're going to be let down. And then all of a sudden he comes up with this prophetic message. Well, who's he talking about here? Anybody? Who's the son, a child that would be born? Jesus. So he was a prophetic message for a long time down the road when Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. So what Jesus is saying here, what you're going through now, I've got a greater plan and a purpose. And my plan will be fulfilled. Where's Christ going to be born? He's going to be born in Bethlehem. He's going to be born of the tribe of Judah. So, in other words, the land of Israel was going to stand. It wasn't going to disappear, even though everything looked bleak, even everything looked like it was just going to fall apart at any moment. He's saying, no, I've got a plan. And this plan will be fulfilled. Even though it be something like 400 years down the road before this would be fulfilled, we know that it happened. So that's what he's getting at when he says this. He's trying to encourage them to understand that God's plan and purpose doesn't always fall into our time frame of our lives. But we should always know that God's plan and purpose will be fulfilled, and we have a part to play in that. Just as they would have a part. See, they can go fight. They can go get all kinds of warriors to fight for them and everything, but God's plan is what they need to look to. And then it says here, going on with the prophetic message, of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth forever. Even forever the zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So he tells them in his next two verses, this is my plan, this is my purpose. And see, they're looking at the northern kingdom and the king of Syria confederated against them. And they're thinking, boy, we're going to be conquered here. And he said, no. There's still going to be people on the throne of David's descendants. Are still going to be on the throne. So he's encouraged them that God's in control of the plan and the purpose of Israel. Just as God is in the plan and the purpose, is in control of the plan and the purpose of Israel, he's in control of the plan and the purpose of our lives too. We don't ever want to forget that. I like what it says, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. In other words, with intention and his zeal, he's going to make it come forth, come to pass. And we see that. Verse 8, the Lord sent a word unto Jacob, and it had lighted upon Israel. And all the people shall know, even Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, that say in the pride and stoutness of heart, the bricks are fallen down, but we will build with huge stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will change them into cedars. Therefore the Lord shall set up the adversaries of reason against him, and upon his enemies together. And the Syrians before, and the Philistines behind. And they shall devour Israel with open mouth. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. Whose hand? Whose anger? God's anger. He wasn't just sitting back and not seeing what was going on. He could see what the northern kingdom was doing. He could see what the Syrian people was doing. He could see their attack on the children of God. He's saying, this is what my zeal, I'm going to bring about the birth of Jesus, but in the meantime, I'm going to take all that they think they're going to do, and I'm going to turn it back on them. That's what he means when he talks about the bricks are fallen down, but we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will change them into cedars. In other words, we're going to survive this. We're going to go on. Any more questions, comments up to this point? Verse 13, for the people turneth not unto him that smiteth them, neither do they seek the Lord of hosts. Now this is an interesting statement. Verse 13. You need to highlight and underline some of this right here. For the people turneth not unto him that smiteth them, neither do they seek the Lord of hosts. Who's he talking about them not turning to? Remember, he's talking here to the northern kingdom. What do you finish up saying here? But his hand is stretched out still for God's anger. He's saying here, God's dealt with the northern kingdom. Remember when he sent the prophet out of Judah that went up and prophesied against the altar at Baal? Remember when he prophesied about the king that would come out of Judah? God had dealt over and over again with the northern kingdom. And he said, the people turneth not unto him that smiteth them. In other words, God's the one that's sending them the things that they're trying to fight against. God's the one that's dealing with them in conviction. And they're not recognizing his hand in the conviction. They're blaming the southern kingdom for all their problems. Well, if the southern kingdom wasn't there, we'd be a lot better off. You see what I'm saying? They're not recognizing God doing this. It says, neither do they seek the Lord of hosts. Therefore the Lord will cut off from Israel head and tail, branch and rush in one day. What a serious time, isn't it? The ancient and honorable, he is the head, and the prophet that teacheth, he is the tail. From the top on down. From the civil government to the religious order in the northern kingdom is going to be done away with. All in one day. For the leaders of this people cause them to err, and they that are led of them are destroyed. Therefore the Lord shall have no joy in their young men, neither shall have mercy on their fatherless and widows. For every one is an hypocrite and an evildoer, and every mouth speaketh folly. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. That should be a blessing to us, because we could be in the same situation. His hand is stretched out still. He's set out to destroy. He's going to finish it. So it says here, for wickedness burneth as the fire, it shall devour the briars and thorns, and shall kindle in the thickest of the forest, and they shall mount up like the lifting up of the smoke. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts is the land darkened, and the people shall be as the fuel of the fire. No man shall spare his brother. When it comes down to God's judgment, we can't help each other out, can we? All we need to do is try to reach them before God's judgment is passed. He shall snatch on the right hand and be hungry, and he shall eat on the left hand, and they shall not be satisfied. That's talking about famine. And they shall eat every man the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh, Ephraim, and Ephraim, Manasseh. And they together shall be against Judah. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. God's judgment on the northern kingdom brought them to the place that they couldn't stand the southern kingdom. And he brought the northern kingdom against the southern kingdom to try to bring the southern kingdom back to him. The northern kingdom had gone so far that God had decided that I'm going to deal with them. He wanted to bring the northern kingdom back. That's why Isaiah was still prophesying. That's why Jeremiah, Hezekiah, and all the ones would come and prophesy to the southern kingdom. Manasseh and Ephraim, and Ephraim and Manasseh, and they together shall be against Judah. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. And in other words, even though they're fulfilling the promise that God has said, or not the promise, but the purpose of God to try to bring Israel back, God's going to fulfill the judgment against them. In other words, like this. Just because a preacher preaches and sees people saved doesn't mean he's saved. Just because a singer sings and sees God moves doesn't mean they're in God's will as far as pleasing God. Because God sometimes will use us to help other people even though that we have been turned back his hand's been turned back onto us for judgment. And that's what happened in the land of Israel. They were going against Judah because they were so mad, and they thought Judah, if they could just get rid of Judah, they could have it made. Without that southern kingdom down there reminding them of Jerusalem and the worship and the place to worship. Remember, if you read on here in the Kings, you'll remember whenever Josiah was king, he called to the northern kingdom and said, come, worship with us. We're going to offer a sacrifice to God. Come down in Jerusalem and worship with us. And they laughed at him and said, no. They kept reminding them that they were supposed to worship in Jerusalem. And you see, that's where the world's at today. Well, if them Christians weren't along, we would be a lot better off. We didn't have all that conviction from the church and from preachers on TV and radio and stuff. We'd be a lot better off. We could get by with what we want. But what they don't realize is that is judgment that God is bringing on them, that their minds are becoming reprobate to where they don't really see the need for Christianity and for the Lord. I can make it on my own. And that's what he was saying here. And I like the 3 times he said this, for all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. And anytime you see the Lord say anything 3 times, that's to be taken serious. You need to take notice of this. When God says to bring judgment on a nation, He says it's done. It's done. For all this, His hand is still stretched out. For all this that they think that they're going to get by, and they think they're going to go some other way, and they think they're going to have victory and everything else, His hand is still stretched out. Read Romans, the 1st chapter. When we studied Romans, judgment's coming on this nation. We don't want it to get to the point that it's too late for this nation. But God can still do the work that He wants to do in our midst. All right, anybody else, any comments or questions on chapter 9? Dad, did I miss anything? What we need to realize is we are tempted as humans to try to find a human answer, or a human way out, or a human way to solve our problems. That's why there's so many books written in libraries on how to succeed, how to get wealthy, how to be happy. Because we as humans try to find some way that we can find somebody to tell us the secret of life. And all that does is prolong the agony until you find Jesus Christ. Will you follow what I'm trying to say to you? But His hand is stretched out still. The northern kingdom was going to feel His wrath. Right now today, I saw a thing on the History Channel the other day, and I'm closing right now. It said they were looking for the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Didn't know where they was at. Where did the 10 lost tribes of Israel go? We know where they went. They fell into God's judgment and was dispersed amongst the land. They're not lost. God knows where they're at. He says He's going to gather them back someday. But the world says, where'd they go to? Because His hand is still stretched out to them. And the judgment. But one of these days they'll be brought back in. And the tribes of Judah will be consolidated once again. Our tribes of Israel will be consolidated once again according to Revelations. All right? All minds clear? Okay, well, we're going to get into chapter 10 next Wednesday night, unless the Lord changes our direction. And